So I thought I would start off and just tell you a little bit about me. I recognize some faces from the last talk I did and some friends and clients and family. Thank you, son and husband, for so I got into this business kind of surreptitiously. I was working in public health around the globe for more than 3 decades, and I got Lyme disease. And I went through the conventional treatments and didn't really ever get well. So I decided that I was going to have to figure it out myself. And so I went back to school to learn about nutrition. My master's degree is in public health and nutrition, so I already had a good foundation. But I decided that I needed to learn more. I became a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, and a nutrition coach, studied with energy healers, did a lot of things to try and put all the pieces together and take the power back from the doctors that I had so easily given it to, take it back for myself. One of the things that I learned, and that's really, the more I learn about it, the more deeply the deeper my conviction is that really all health starts in the gut. And I think more and more physicians are coming to understand this. There's so much research about poor health of the gut being associated with autoimmune diseases, with cancers, with depression, with arthritis, with all kinds of things that we used to think were diseases of aging. And now what we understand is they're diseases that start in the gut. So I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk really about how the gut works, because one of the best things that I can teach people is really what's going on inside of them, like how it works. You know, what happens when things don't work? What's happening? Because if you understand that, then you have a sense of what to do about it. So I'm going to do some anatomy and physiology, kind of the role and function of the digestive system, different organs in the digestive system. And then I'm going to talk about some things that can go wrong and how you heal the gut. I will say that I'm also starting a Heal Your Gut group. It will meet on Saturdays from 11 to 12:30, starting in 2 weeks, and we'll meet over the course of 7 weeks, but we'll meet 5 times, and it will be $250 a person. So if that's something that you're interested in, please sign up or grab a brochure and send me an email about it. I'm going to limit it to 10 people because the group dynamic is really important. But there are so many things that we can do to heal our gut besides taking drugs. So this is a small group. Ask questions, interrupt me, and we'll see where it goes. And don't you love my little animated guy? He's adorable. He needs a skirt.
He's perfect. Just the way he is.
Okay, so why do we want to talk about the gut? Well, the gut, so I'm talking about, when I say the gut, I'm talking about from the mouth, that long tube that goes all the way down our body to our anus. It affects every organ and every system in the body. It even affects us down to the genetic level, to our DNA. We know that we used to think that we were born with what we're born with, and that's it. Now we know that the DNA in our body changes, and it changes in relationship to other bacteria that enter our body. So DNA can change. What we know, we used to say, oh, you are what you eat. But what we know is that's not true. You are what you eat, and can break down, and can absorb, and can utilize, and can get rid of. And that's where the glitch is. So many of us have digestive issues because of our lifestyle, the food we eat, the chemicals in the environment, so many things that I'm going to talk about. We do know, and there's very good research on this from Hopkins, from Yale, from the University of Michigan, really from all over the country. Cancers, depression, autoimmune diseases, psoriasis, eczema, arthritis, and many more start in the gut or are significantly affected by gut health. So what do we know about the digestive system in general? Well, if you think about it, the first time that foreign substances enter our body is through our mouth and our nose. So the digestive system protects us from foreign bacteria and from parasites. That's the job of the stomach, and that's why the stomach produces hydrochloric acid, and we're going to talk at length about that. The mucus lining of the gut protects the rest of the tissues from being burned by the hydrochloric acid because it's quite strong. The gut also protects against all the mechanical stress that happens in order to digest our food. So we use a lot of muscles in the esophagus and around the esophagus to bring the food down into the stomach. A lot of muscles in the stomach to churn up the food like a Vitamix. Muscles in the small intestine and around the small intestine to move the food that's in that 20-foot contorted tube, and then in our large intestine. And the digestive system is what allows us to excrete toxins that we are both making from our own waste products as well as getting from the environment. So what we know is so I think of the gut really as a barrier system. We want the bad guys to be eliminated once they enter our body. When the barrier system fails, our mucous membranes, the stomach's not acidic enough, we can eliminate toxins, we get things like leaky gut, heartburn, reflux, irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disease, arthritis, depression and anxiety, mood disorders, including ADHD. The studies with young children who are on the autism spectrum or who have ADHD are phenomenal about how you can change the way the brain works by the gut, by changing the gut. Weight gain, weight loss, reduced immunity, all these things happen when the gut doesn't work right. Must be a better way to advance this, but. So we're going to talk about, we're going to learn about the gut, the anatomy, function, and physiology, and we're going to learn about healing the gut with food, styles, and a little bit of supplements. A little bit on supplements.
Try the space bar or the arrow down.
There's no arrow down here, but there, space bar. Good, that works better. Okay. So let's start off looking at gut anatomy, and I just want you to be able to visualize this. So I did not bring a pointer, so I'm going to use my fingers. So this is. Am I in the way? Can you see? Okay. So the mouth here, the food comes into the mouth, and this little flap right here is the epiglottis, and that's what falls over the pharynx so that food doesn't go down into our trachea. Instead, it goes down the esophagus. It's a very long tube into the stomach. This pink thing here is the stomach. And the stomach, I'm going to, again, talk in detail about this, so I won't say too much about it except for it's kind of this pouch-like organ right here. This is the liver and the gallbladder, and here's the pancreas. The gallbladder and the pancreas both dump into the stomach. This is the small intestine, this pink thing here. There's more than 20 feet of the small intestine, and it hooks up into the large intestine or the colon and comes down into the rectum and the anus. So oftentimes people, they say they have a stomach ache, but look how high up the stomach is on the left side. It's all the way up here under the ribs. When people have a stomach ache or abdominal pain, usually they're holding their belly down here. So if you put your hands right below your belly button, that's where the small intestine is. And this is the major absorptive organ in the body. And it's huge. So we know it's at least 30 feet for most people from top to bottom, and the small intestine itself is 20 feet. So digestion begins in the cephalic region of the brain with the vagus nerve. Now this is this is the vagus nerve here, and it comes all the way down to the stomach, and it's what allows the stomach, it goes beyond the stomach actually, and it is what tells the stomach to produce stomach acid, hydrochloric acid, and pepsin, which starts to break down proteins. But more importantly, it's like this super highway. They now call the gut the second brain. And there's this gut-brain axis. It goes in both directions. So when the gut is upset, excitatory or toxic chemicals travel from the gut into the brain and disrupt mood. And they travel from the brain into the gut. So people that have chronic gut issues have mood issues. They can't help it. Why? Well, in the gut, we produce 70 to 80% of our neurotransmitters, those feel-good chemicals that affect our mood, right, that come to the brain, but they're produced in the gut. And so if our gut's not working, we're not producing them, either we're not producing enough of them, or we're not producing them in the right balance, the right ratio to each other. So oftentimes clients will come to me and their stomach's bothering them, but what's really bothering them is anxiety and depression. And it's not related to their life, really. It's related to their gut. But it also goes the other way around. So when we're depressed or anxious or fearful about things in our life, those same chemicals disrupt our gut. So talking about, I want to talk a little bit about what happens in the brain in addition to the gut-brain axis. So when we smell food, when we anticipate a meal, when we're cooking and preparing a meal, or when we pause for prayer or gratitude before a meal, we are stimulating the cephalic region of the brain. And that tells our body, pancreas, liver, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, get ready because we're going to eat. So what we now know is that people that don't cook, that just grab, let's say, a protein bar, and there's no involvement with smells or anticipation of food, or even the way food looks, they don't produce the same level of stomach acid or gastric juices. They've already, at that point, compromised their ability to digest, break down, and absorb food. So already, that's how soon it starts. So when we pause for prayer or gratitude over our food, we're actually giving our body a chance to get ready to receive the meal. Who knew? I talked about the gut-brain axis, so don't need to repeat that. So let's begin the journey in the mouth. So there's two things that happen when we put food into our mouth. There's mechanical processing, chewing, right? And then chemical processing. We produce a couple of different chemicals, enzymes that get things going. Now, chewing is really important for a couple of reasons. One is the more we chew, the more our salivary glands release amylase. Amylase, and anything that ends with ASE is an enzyme. Amylase, andrase, protease, those are all enzymes. So every time we chew, we are releasing more amylase. And amylase begins the breakdown of carbohydrates in our mouth. Why is this important? Because carbohydrates break down into simple sugars. And they're the first thing and the easiest thing for our body to get a hold of and break down into simple sugars, take that glucose and get it to the cells for energy. It also increases the surface area of the food so that more of the food can be worked on by the enzyme amylase. So amylase is the first chemical that's produced, the first enzyme. But the saliva glands, there are three that produce chemicals. And in addition to amylase, we produce bicarbonate of soda so that this big bolus that we're going to form in our mouth won't be too acidic, it won't burn our tongue. And we also produce something called anhydride. We'll talk about anhydride in a minute, but thorough chewing in and of itself can eliminate or dramatically minimize bloating, gas, and abdominal pain. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I just I included some tidbits in here, but anhydrase, which is another enzyme, it ends in ASE, which is also produced by one of the three salivary glands in the mouth, does a couple things. It maintains the pH of bolus so that the taste buds won't be damaged by something that's too acidic. Now, one of the things that we do know is that people that are zinc deficient are not producing enough anhydrase. And when they're zinc deficient, it kills the taste buds, and so they tend to be very picky eaters. So oftentimes you'll find that people who have had chemotherapy, they don't have much taste going on in their mouths because the chemo in and of itself has killed a number of the taste buds. and they're zinc deficient. Zinc is a critical nutrient for the immune system. Interestingly enough, a mild zinc deficiency is very common in children with autism. It's also very common in people who have Lyme disease and who have Crohn's and irritable bowel disease. People who have anorexia and people with growth challenges also have mild zinc deficiencies. And this is kind of a circuitous thing because if they have a zinc deficiency, they don't have the same level of taste and not as many active taste buds in their mouth. It depends on the soil. More and more of our vegetables are depleted of zinc because the soil is not very good. But zinc is critical for metabolic activity in the body. So this process of breaking down food particles to get at the nutrients is so important. We're going to talk a lot about leaky gut later on as we go, but some simple food molecules can be absorbed right into the bloodstream from the stomach. Most have to go through the small intestine and be broken down. So protein molecules, long chains of sugars called polysaccharides, and triglycerides, which are fatty acids, they cannot be absorbed into the bloodstream without causing problems in the rest of the digestive system. So this is a picture of the human stomach, and I want to emphasize how important the role of the stomach is, and this is because the stomach is where the rubber meets the road. This is where parasites and bacteria come in on our food. You go to a salad bar at Giant or at Whole Foods or wherever you get your salad, maybe it's clean and maybe it's not. So we all remember reading about E. coli on spinach and salmonella in sprouts. Well, the hydrochloric acid that is produced in the stomach is what kills those. When we get older, we produce less hydrochloric acid. When we have digestive issues, we produce less hydrochloric acid. When we're under stress, chronic stress, we produce less hydrochloric acid. There are many reasons why we produce less hydrochloric acid. But what happens is that if you don't produce enough, food stays in the stomach for longer than it really needs to, and it begins to putrefy and ferment. And then we get bacterial overgrowth that moves into the small intestine. Maybe you've heard of SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial growth. And we also get bloating, discomfort, gas pains. And this is what reflexes back into the esophagus. So you remember the commercials for the purple pill? Yeah. And the proton pump inhibitors and those medications that quell the acid production were very popular for years. In fact, they are the best-selling drugs, pharmaceuticals on the market. Because people would reflux and this acid up into their esophagus, and it would burn. They'd get heartburn and be really uncomfortable. And so the thought was, let's put a Band-Aid on it. Let's bring down the acid. Now what we understand is that's actually a symptom of low acid, low stomach acid. And by taking proton pump inhibitors, Tums on a regular basis, antacids, any of these things, we are putting a Band-Aid on a much more difficult and complicated problem. Dr. Jonathan Wright is someone who writes a lot about this. He's very smart, and if you want to learn more about stomach acid, I would Google him, and he's got a couple of books out. So hydrochloric acid kills, I already mentioned, kills bacterial organisms and parasites that enter with food. And in the stomach, pepsin is produced along with hydrochloric acid. Pepsin begins the breakdown of proteins. So we started the breakdown of carbohydrates in our mouth, and a little bit of bile through the salivary glands, actually, bile salts, to help us begin just initially the process of fatty acid breakdown. But it's not until the stomach that we start to break down proteins. We continue to break down carbohydrates, and so there's that chemical processing, but then the mechanical processing is like a Vitamix in there. Anybody know what a Vitamix is?
Oh,
Yeah, high-speed blender, right? So that's what's happening in the stomach. And we're not really aware of it unless we've eaten something that bothers us, and then we get cramps or we hear gurgling, but we're not aware of the intense muscular action that's happening in our stomach to allow food to move down. Now, food stays, 50% of our food that we eat stays in the stomach about 2 to 2.5 hours. The other 50% takes another 2 hours. So food can stay in the stomach between 4 and 6 hours before it passes into the small intestine. We call the mix in the stomach with hydrochloric acid, bicarbonate of soda, and pepsin, and a couple of other things. We call that chyme. And it's 1 to 3 hours before it passes into the pyloric sphincter from the stomach. So we're going to jump to the small intestine. That's this contorted thing that sits right below the belly button. This is so the stomach is the major organ for digesting food, breaking it down. The small intestine is the major organ for absorbing nutrients. It is the absorber for the most part. A couple of places, large intestine absorbs a little bit, stomach a little bit, lets water pass through into the bloodstream. But really, most of the work happens in the small intestine. There are 3 areas of the small intestine: the duodenum at the top, the jejunum, and the ileum. What's fascinating is depending on if you have issues in the small intestine, depending on which area of the small intestine you have trouble with, you will know what the issue is, what the associated issue is. So we'll get to that in a second. So I did tell you that small intestine is the VIP when it comes to nutrient absorption and transport into the bloodstream. So we'll start with the duodenum. So the duodenum is the primary site for digestion and breakdown of food. It's in the first part of the small intestine. It introduces pancreatic enzymes to digest carbohydrates into glucose and fat into water-soluble particles. So fat cannot be transported in and of itself through the bloodstream. It has to be broken down into water-soluble particles and connected or hooked onto other molecules. And then also bile from the gallbladder to break down fat into fatty acids. The jejunum absorbs carbohydrates and proteins that have been broken down as amino acids, and it's the primary site for absorption, the jejunum is. The ileum absorbs vitamin B12, bile salts, and products of digestion that have not yet been absorbed, stuff that's left over. It's also responsible for much of the immune system. So what happens when things go south in the small intestine? Well, first of all, this picture on the right here, these are called villi. And villi are like the shag on a shag carpet, or fingers that wave back and forth. And there's hundreds of thousands of them that line the 20-foot tube of the small intestine. These are the primary site for nutrient absorption. They are critical to being healthy. So what we know is that with age, with food sensitivities, with chronic inflammation, even with viruses, the top of the villi break off. And they're flat. So instead of waving around like fingers like this, they're like this. And so the sites for absorption are gone, or at least minimized. Depending on where in the small intestine the villi break off, the consequences of that, how disease will manifest itself, depends on where in the small intestine they break off. So, for example, celiac disease, we know that these are broken off. Non-celiac gluten sensitivity, any food sensitivity. So I am sensitive to dairy and gluten and soy. Dairy is the casein molecule. It's a very large elastic protein molecule. Gluten is also, it's actually gliadin. It's a very large protein molecule. And soy is a very large protein molecule. So if you've had any disruption in the gut, and so for me I had lots of antibiotics, so that caused disruption in the gut. I became sensitive to these foods. They were just too hard to digest. Once you have the damage, the gut can repair, but I probably will always now be sensitive to at least food. It's the most difficult to digest because it's become so elastic. So when those villi break off, and because, again, that's where the nutrient absorption takes place in the body, it sets the stage for leaky gut, nutrient depletion, candida overgrowth, and a whole series of symptoms and ultimately diseases. So let's talk about protein molecules. So protein molecules are this long chain of polypeptides, like a strand of pearls, really. And when we don't have any gut issues, and our small intestine is working fine, we break down the protein molecules, this long chain of pearls, into one pearl at a time. And one pearl at a time, one amino acid is let into the bloodstream by the gut. When the gut becomes leaky, what happens is that the outer wall of the small intestine starts to get space between it. So visualize all these pearls, visualize space between each of the pearls. Like the pearl would go from here to here, and that wouldn't be there, there'd just be a space there. Then a molecule, protein molecule called zonulin comes and wedges in between those two pearls and keeps the space wide. And when that happens, a whole section of the pearl necklace gets through into the bloodstream. So a whole section of the polypeptide, or the protein, or a whole section of amino acids gets into the bloodstream. We don't feel this, of course. It's happening at a microscopic level. But when that happens, there's an attack. I'm sorry, the word attack. You love those animated characters. I feel like it was such a fine. So as the inflammation in the intestine advances, which has been provoked by the now very agitated, inflamed climate in the gut, immune cells are destroyed. So it's not just the interior of the small intestine, but the immune system sits right next to it, especially in the ileum. So so many immune cells get destroyed, and when the immune cells get destroyed, your body is further incapacitated in terms of fighting infection. So you can see this cascading effect on your health. So let me just go back. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about leaky gut, but I do want to say that there are many gastroenterologists that don't believe in the idea of leaky gut. There are many that do. So there's a controversy. As in much of medicine, there's controversy about what's really happening. But what we know is that these protein molecules, and it's especially protein, leaks from the small intestine into the bloodstream. And the bloodstream, the white blood cells that are rampant through the bloodstream say, a foreigner, it's a foreigner, it's an attack. And they mount an offensive against these food particles. Now, white blood cells know what's their tissue and what's foreign. And when food is properly digested, it recognizes it as food. But when food, like these strands of polypeptides that come in, strands of amino acids that come in through the gut, come into the bloodstream, the white blood cells think it's a foreigner. And this is what autoimmune disease is. When the white blood cells begin to attack not just the foreigner, the invading protein molecules, the invading amino acids, they begin to attack the tissue around it. And that, depending on whether it's the duodenum, the jejunum, or the ileum, that affects different areas of the body. There's a physician named Dr. Susan Blum out of Connecticut who recently wrote a book called Healing Your Gut, Healing Autoimmune Diseases. And she's one of at least a dozen physicians who've come out in the last 2 years with books about how the root of all autoimmune disease, including MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, all these things start in the gut, and they start with this leaky gut, with this leakage of these amino acids into the bloodstream. So diarrhea and constipation, they are two different sides of the same coin. They result from consumption of foods that begin to putrefy and ferment in the small intestine. When they do this, they send excitatory molecules all the way up to the brain. The brain then interprets this as anxiety, frustration, anger, all kinds of mood swings. And the small intestine gets so inflamed that it pushes the waste out of the small intestine into the large intestine as quickly as it can. And then through the large intestine, and that's diarrhea. But the body can, and because the tissues are so irritated, it comes very quick. But the body can also react in the other direction, which is that there's so much inflammation in the inside of the small and large intestine that food can't pass. The molecules, the waste can't pass. And then you get hard stools. The body absorbs the water from this partially digested food. You get these hard stools, and you're holding these toxins in your large intestine. And ultimately, the toxins get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, and you feel sick. So let's talk a little bit more about elimination. So when I see clients, I often give them a food, mood, and poop chart because it's important to know what's coming out. It's just as important to know what's coming out as what's going in. And the color, the shape, the texture, the size, the odor of stool tells you a lot about how the innards are working. So waste from the small intestine moves through the ileocecal valve, which is right down on the right side here, into the large intestine. And the large intestine reabsorbs water and electrolytes from the remaining products in the bloodstream before it leaves the body. Into 4 parts. There is, if you take your hand and put it on the right side of your body, this is the ascending colon that comes up the right side of the body, and it's connected by the ileocecal valve to the small intestine. Across, underneath the ribs, is the transverse colon. Down the left side is the descending colon. And the last part of the colon that connects with the rectum meatus is called the sigmoid colon. The colon, also called the large intestine, extracts the final bits of food, final bits of nutrients, and really important minerals like calcium, zinc, magnesium, iron, copper. It holds on to those minerals and they pass through the intestinal wall and back into the bloodstream. And then the waste comes out the rectum. So, this is pretty interesting. When an unhealthy colon is not easily able to expel the feces, the toxins go back into the bloodstream. The more that happens, the more regular bowel movements or elimination is compromised. So sinus trouble is associated with congestion in the ascending colon. Indigestion is associated with trouble in the ascending colon. Heart troubles, low blood pressure are associated with the transverse colon. Issues related to the adrenals, the adrenal glands, and the kidneys in the back are related to the descending colon. And bladder troubles reside closer towards the rectum. So a gastroenterologist will be able to make the connection between your symptoms and your colon and where in the colon the problem is happening. So as I mentioned, the elimination of undigested food is equally as important as the digestion and assimilation of food. So let's talk about transit time. This is the time required for food and waste to move through the entire digestive system. It's affected by what we're eating and how much we're eating. So, for example, if we overeat, the transit time is much slower. If we're eating lightly, it's much quicker. if we're eating heavy meat and potatoes and sugary things, combining a lot of different foods, Thanksgiving, you think about Thanksgiving dinner, that will slow down the transit time. The time of day that the meal's eaten. Lunchtime is the best time. We have the strongest digestive fire. It's the best time to eat the biggest meal. So if we eat late at night, we're not giving our body enough of an opportunity to get rid of, to have the digestive process work and get rid of the food out of our stomach and into our small intestine and into the large intestine. The health of the digestive organs. So if one's not producing enough stomach acid, this whole process is slowed down. Psychological stress when eating. If you're stressed or tense or grabbing a meal and eating it in the car, as I often did for years and embarrassingly still sometimes do. Or if you're having dinner and it's a difficult conversation, or you're watching the news and you're watching ISIS or whatever it is, this affects transit time because the muscles involuntarily constrict. Gender, women have a harder time with women have 10 feet more large intestine than men. And so they have it takes longer for the waste to pass through into the rectum for women than it does for men. Endocrine hormone status, so hypothyroidism results in constipation, slow transit time of constipation. Medications, for example, Advil, Tylenol, other over-the-counter medications slow down the transit time. So transit time can be as short as 16 hours or as long as 4 or 5 days. There's a really good test to see how long your transit time is, and it's important to know because there are things that you can do to lengthen it or shorten it. When you eat beets, your poop comes out red. So you eat beets, you write down the hour that you're eating them, and you see how long it takes before your stool's red. And then you know. It's a really easy at-home test. If it's taking 3 or 4 days, you probably need to think about ways to speed up the transit time. If your stool is taking 4 days, you probably have gas, you probably have bloating, you probably have some constipation, you may even have cramping. If your time is short, like shorter than 16 hours, you aren't absorbing enough nutrients. So you need to figure out if you need to add some fiber or water, what it is you need to do to slow down the transit time. There's some illnesses that are strongly correlated with slow transit time, and diabetes is a big one. So the rule of thumb is at least 1 bowel movement a day, preferably 2 to 3. What are the things that help with bowel movement? Having enough water. So the more constipated we get, the harder our stools get. The harder our stools get, the less water they have. So drinking a lot of water makes a difference. Exercise. So as I mentioned, we have all this muscular movement happening in our digestive system. So if we're exercising, particularly if we're using our core muscles, and that doesn't necessarily mean sit-ups, even just raising your leg, just like this, that's using my core muscles. Anything like that, swimming, anything really that moves the body is increasing the muscular intensity of the colon, the ability of the colon to move. Having enough fiber. Now, fiber can go 2 ways. Some people can increase their fiber and end up being more constipated, so it depends on what's actually happening, where the block is. But fiber is often a good way to increase bowel movements, and we don't eat enough fiber in our standard American diet. Chewing and swallowing, as I mentioned, the more we chew, the more enzymes we produce. The more enzymes we produce, the better broken down our food is. Swallowing. So swallowing is important because if we swallow a great big bolus of food, it's much harder to break down. Time, place, situations of eating. We want to be in a relaxed state of mind when we eat. We want to take the time, the 20 minutes, the 30 minutes, whatever it is, to be away from our desk and eat. Our body needs it. We need to have enough stomach acid. If we don't have enough stomach acid, we're not secreting enough pancreatic enzymes, we're not breaking down the food, we're not secreting enough bile to break down the fatty acids, and this slows down everything. The parasympathetic nervous system, so there's the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight nervous system, and then there's the parasympathetic, which is rest and relax. We want to be in the parasympathetic nervous system when we're eating. The type and quantity of food affects bowel movements, as I mentioned. Food sensitivity. So if you're eating a lot of sugar, if you're eating foods that you are sensitive to, like gluten or dairy or soy, sometimes citrus, sometimes nuts, this will cause inflammation in the small large intestine, and you will end up being constipated. And elimination diets are good things for that, and I talked about over-the-counter medications. So I'm going to go back to stomach acid because I think this is so important. What are the signs? And so most people, clients say to me, well, I don't know, I don't think I have low stomach acid. You know, I seem to digest my food fine. But if you notice any of these many symptoms, you don't have enough stomach acid. Bad breath, belching, or gas an hour after eating, bloating in the mid to lower abdomen after eating, diarrhea shortly after consuming a meal, distension of the belly, fatigue, food sensitivities, an excessive feeling of fullness, headaches, heartburn, increased incidence of parasitic infection, sweat with a strong odor, your stomach gets upset after taking vitamins, especially fish oil. Anybody ever take fish oil and get that awful burp? Yeah. Strong desire to skip meals, indigestion, malabsorption, nausea. You can see the list goes on. So stomach acid is so strongly associated with so many symptoms, and it just cascades all the way through our digestive system. This is another interesting thing about stomach acid, about hydrochloric acid in the stomach, is that hydrochloric acid helps cleave the B12 vitamin from iron. Cleave, like separate the B12 from iron. If you don't separate it in the stomach, it goes into the small intestine as one molecule, as a protein molecule, and you never get the B12. So it has to be, and people end up anemic. And eating red meat doesn't do a thing because the problem is higher up, it's in the stomach. So I see a number of clients that are anemic and their doctor has them on iron and it's not doing anything because they don't have enough stomach acid. So you have to have enough stomach acid to be able to cleave away the B12, which is in animal protein. In fact, people that are vegetarians are missing B12 and need to supplement with it. But they can't break apart the iron from the B12 and they end up being B12 deficient. And iron deficient, because they can't absorb the iron. Conditions associated with low stomach acid. Well, you name them and they're on that list. But what's surprising was osteoporosis. So I didn't realize that osteoporosis was so strongly correlated with low stomach acid. Interestingly enough, the older we get, the more we find our doctors put us on the things to quell acid. But the older we get, the less acid we produce. So
I told my doctor that, and he looked at me like I had three heads. I said, why would you want to put me on vaccine? That's not my problem. I'm not creating enough acid. And he just, if he's the doctor,
yeah,
the gastro,
yeah,
it's crazy.
right. So this is old school.
Oh, and he's young,
Yeah.
which is really sad.
Yeah.
He's our age.
So there's a really easy test that you can do at home to see if you have enough stomach acid. So the first thing in the morning before you eat, you take 1 teaspoon of baking soda and you put it in a big glass of water, like 8 ounces of water. Not cold water, like room temperature so that it dissolves really well. And you think really hard about what you're going to eat for breakfast so that you can get your digestive juices flowing. You really want to visualize it. Some great eggs and bacon or toast, whatever you like to eat for breakfast. You want to activate that cephalic reflex that starts in the brain. You then drink the entire glass of water and you wait 10 to 15 minutes. And if there's acid in your stomach, you will burp. And because the acid will react with baking soda. If you don't burp, there's not enough acid. So it's an easy thing you can do at home. So just 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So what do you do if you have low stomach acid? Well, what I would not recommend you do is run out and get a supplement that's hydrochloric acid with potassium because it is extremely strong. And if you haven't been producing enough stomach acid and you just start off with that supplement, you will burn your esophagus. So raw organic apple cider vinegar or lemon juice before your meals to slowly ramp up the stomach acidity. How much? I'll start with half a teaspoon of apple cider. See how you do in water. Sip it during meals. See how you do. Now, one thing that I mentioned in the last talk, you never want to drink a lot of fluid with your meal. You can drink 20 minutes before, you can drink 45 minutes after. But if you drink a lot of beverage with your meal, no matter what the beverage is, you're diluting the enzymes. So the food is going to sit in your gut longer. You're also diluting the acid. Herbs like ginger, turmeric, or DGL, DGL is deglycerinized licorice, will help with, actually ginger and turmeric will help stimulate stomach acid, and DGL is excellent for healing the esophageal tissues that have been irritated for whatever reasons, and there are many reasons which we'll talk about. Supplements like bitters, probiotics, and digestive enzymes are also very helpful.
Is that why Bragg is so popular?
I'm sorry?
Bragg, amino acids.
Bragg's. Yeah.
That's why, that, you can take that.
Oh, well, Bragg's apple cider
Yeah.
is very popular.
Right.
The mother.
Yeah, right.
So is this
Yeah.
slideshow on your website or anything, so we don't have to take extensive minutes?
It is not. But.
It will be when you put your video up.
Yeah, but I'll put the video up
Okay, that'd be great.
when I find someone to do it.
When you find what?
Someone who knows how to do that.
Oh, you can send it to me, I'll take care of it.
What are some other causes of heartburn? So the LES, or the lower esophageal sphincter, is the sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. The food has to pass through it as you swallow to get into the stomach. And that little flap is supposed to stay shut, snap shut, right, and not come back up. But if you are doing any of these things, then it can easily irritate that sphincter. And so it doesn't sit tight on the valve, it sits at an angle, or it flaps, or the flap is slightly up. And when that happens, it allows that regurgitation of the contents of the stomach, which are highly acidic. Now, if you have reflux, the acid can cause and will cause erosions in your esophagus. So it is important to protect your esophagus. But it's equally as important to get to the bottom of what's causing that in the first place. So, routine use of NSAIDs like Advil, calcium channel blockers, beta blockers, other over-the-counter medications, commonly prescribed drugs, coffee, alcohol, sugar, gluten, dairy, eating too quickly, eating too much, eating just before bed. All these things can bother that lower esophageal sphincter. So if you are having heartburn, think about what it could be. What of these things do you routinely do? Think about, do you have heartburn first thing in the morning or, at 11 o'clock after you've had coffee at 8 or 9? Well, connect the dots.
How does heartburn feel?
I'm sorry?
How does heartburn feel?
It
Would
feels
you know it if you
like,
had it?
well, the reason it's called heartburn is because oftentimes people mistake it for a heart attack.
Oh,
They
yeah.
feel pain around their heart, or they feel a burning sensation or a tightening in the chest. So when the esophageal tissue gets inflamed, it constricts, the muscles around it constrict, so there's a tightening of the chest wall, and that can feel like a heart attack. And because it's acidic, it's burning, so it can also feel like burning. So you know if you have heartburn.
Yeah, trust me.
Okay.
It can, right, it absolutely,
that one.
it can radiate down the arms, absolutely. So it really can mirror a heart attack. But you think about what you're eating and see if you can connect the dots.
Because I have lemon in my water first thing in the morning before I do anything. And I was wondering if adding that acid is good or not.
Does it bother you?
No, I've never had heartburn, that's why I asked.
Good. So then what it's doing is it's just helping ensure that you have enough stomach acid. So that's a good thing. You can do that instead of apple cider vinegar. The other great thing about lemon in water is that it gets the liver going. So it really, the liver, we're not going to, I don't think we'll have enough time to talk too much about the liver, but the liver, which sits on the right side of the body, it is the biggest detoxification organ in the body, and it is absolutely critical to digestion and to detoxifying heavy metals and all kinds of contaminants that we accumulate, both from our own waste, our metabolic processes that create waste, as well as things we pick up from the environment. Water is really good for stimulating the liver to get it going on its detox path. Food combining. Anybody here ever heard of food combining? Yeah. So there's something called the Body Ecology Diet. It's relatively well known, and the Body Ecology Diet promotes this idea of being mindful about what foods you combine. Now, if you don't have any digestive issues, food combining should not be an issue for you. But if you have inflammation in your gut, if you have any digestive issues, what's happening is that if you're eating foods that digest pretty quickly with foods that stay in the system, you get putrefaction or fermentation in the gut. So let me give you an example. Melon, which has a lot of sugar in it, is very quickly broken down and absorbed. It's one of the quickest foods in terms of transit time and getting broken down and getting the glucose get into the bloodstream. If you have a tenderloin and a baked potato and a salad, let's say, so you're mixing a protein with some vegetables and some carbohydrates, and then you have fruit for dessert. The sugar from the fruit can't go anywhere because you've got this big bolus of food that's going to take a long time to digest. So the first thing that gets digested are carbohydrates, and then proteins, and then fats. So that meat is going to be sitting there for a long time. So the melon starts to ferment, and you get gas, you get distension, you can get bloating. Make sense? Yeah. So for people that have a really hearty stomach, they could eat food afterwards and may not have any problems, but it's not ideal. So food combining, I didn't want to go into a whole big thing on food combining, but there are kind of 6 principles, and you can look them up on the internet. It's called the Body Ecology Diet, but basically you don't mix animal proteins with starchy vegetables or carbohydrates. You eat things like quinoa and rice with non-starchy or starchy vegetables, not animal proteins. You eat fruit alone or with nuts. Sorry?
Which is the American diet, which is protein and starch.
Yeah. Right.
Steak and potatoes.
So if you're trying to heal your gut, you want to look up the Body Ecology Diet and at least know what the principles are, and you can apply them or not. But again, it's a tool to help heal your gut.
So no dessert after dinner?
Sorry?
No dessert after dinner?
You wait.
Yeah.
Give your body a chance to, give your body 2 hours chance for the stomach contents to start to move down into the small intestine. So it's when we have dessert on a full stomach that everything just sits there.
Okay.
And it makes sense.
That's right.
And so when that happens, so one of the metabolic waste products of digestion is alcohol. Not the alcohol we drink, but it's a form of alcohol. And alcohol will cause fermentation in the gut in and of itself. So candida growth, overgrowth is very common for people that eat fruits and proteins and carbohydrates all together. So what are some symptoms of poor digestion? Well, one is you have undigested food in the stool. Poop that smells really bad. You feel better when you don't eat. You have chronic indigestion or heartburn after you eat. You have poor sleep. You wake up generally around 2 or 3 in the morning. You have depression and anxiety, anger, irritability, unexplained mood swings, foggy memory. The need to unbutton your pants after eating Thanksgiving dinner. Frequent burping, gas, bloating. Increase in heart rate after you eat. Sleepiness or fatigue right after you eat. Or you have a coated tongue, acne, skin disorders, autism, sensory issues, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you about skin for a moment. Skin is our largest organ, and it's the largest organ for detoxing. So when we get rashes or hives, our body is desperately trying to get rid of some kind of toxin. And the liver's too busy, and the gut's not working well enough, and so it comes out on the skin. So people that have psoriasis or eczema or get hives, they have a gut issue, but rarely does their gut get treated. A dermatologist gives them a topical, or they take prednisone or something else to hold the rash at bay, but they never get to the root of it.
Or an antibiotic.
Or an antibiotic. Right, which makes it worse. Exactly. So let's talk about healing. Let me talk about one other thing before we get to healing the gut. What happens when you take antibiotics? Thank you. So what is your name?
Kara.
Kara, for bringing that up. So as I mentioned, with Lyme disease, I took a lot of antibiotics over a long period of time. And what that does is it kills the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria. We always have bad bacteria in our gut. We always have yeast in our gut. We need it. It balances the good stuff. So it's really like an 80-20 ratio. 80% good stuff, 20% bad stuff. And they live in harmony. Well, when you start wiping out the good stuff, the bad bacteria, parasites, fungus, they're very opportunistic. They move in, they take over the neighborhood, and they proliferate. And bad bacteria produce toxins. So it's that, remember that gut-brain axis we talked about? So you find yourself having mood disorders, not sleeping well, not thinking clearly, being agitated easily. You can fix that, and we're going to talk about that in healing the gut. But there's a lot of attention right now on what's called the microbiome, or all the billions of bacteria that are in our gut. And what we're discovering is that they're really important, that there's more bacteria than there is like regular DNA. More bacteria than the rest of us. It's pretty weird. So this is cool. The gut lining repairs and replaces itself every 3 to 5 days. So our bodies are really quite miraculous. The material that is sloughed off actually contains fluids and enzymes that help heal the gut. But, this is the big but, if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we never get past the 3 to 5 days. And of course, if you have a lot of inflammation, it's much longer. But the potential is there. Our bodies were made to heal. So we're going to talk about some things you can do. Now, I will say from the get-go, there is no one protocol that everyone should follow. Everyone is very different. So when I consider the health of someone, I visualize a 3-legged stool. One leg is the genes that we're born with, right? What your parents brought to the table. The second is the food that you eat, the water, the beverages that you ingest. By sanitation.
Let me guess, he's your son.
He is. Santa's my youngest. And so what we take in, and the third is the environment, what we're exposed to, toxins in the air that we breathe, the ticks that we come across when we're hiking with our dogs in the woods, the violence that happens in our neighborhood, a war, all the things that happen in stress in the workplace, all the things that happen in our environment. So you have to think about that three-legged stool. Two of those three legs are things that affect us from the outside in. We can control some of them. My feeling about it, having suffered with illness for a long time, is that if you can control some of those things, why wouldn't you? It's really hard. As
I know the
everyone
answer to
here
that.
probably knows, it is really hard to make change. But you do it one habit at a time. And when I coach my clients, it's one habit at a time until the new habit becomes an old one, like brushing your teeth. And then you move on to the next one. And then you've got that down for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you move on to the next one. So you're slowly trying to make changes in a supportive way that fit with your lifestyle. But healing doesn't happen unless you make these changes and unless you sustain them. So for some people, fiber is really helpful. For some people. So it can make the stool soft and bulky. It speeds the transit time. It dilutes the effect of toxic compounds. It helps to remove bad bacteria from the colon because fiber attracts the bacteria. And we know that low fiber diets are one of the leading causes for things like diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, IBS, constipation, colon cancer. Some good sources of fiber. There's insoluble and soluble fiber. So anybody know the difference? So when I think about soluble fiber, I think about oatmeal. You add water to it and it expands, right? Like chia seeds, they expand, and that's what it does in your colon. Then there's insoluble fiber, like the peels from apples or nuts and seeds. They don't really expand. They just move through. So we want both, and most foods have both soluble and insoluble fiber. So the sources for fiber include lentils and beans, pectin, which comes from apples, or you can even buy pectin as a supplement over the counter. Carrots, orange peel, psyllium husks, and vegetables. You have to increase your water if you're increasing your fiber. Why? So a client, right, exactly. So a client came to me and she started using chia seeds in her smoothie every morning. And she said, oh my God, I feel terrible. I'm so constipated. I'm like bloated out to here. Well, she hadn't increased her water, and chia seeds suck up the liquid. So you need more liquid in order to keep things moving. So you must increase your water.
So how do you eat an orange peel?
I'm sorry?
Smooth.
How do you say a little louder?
How do you eat an orange peel?
So there's actually the peels from citrus, especially from lemon, has something called limonene in it, Limonene. And if you've ever seen what are those things called, a zester, you can zest the peel of a lemon or an orange into your food, and it's very healing to the gut. Not only is it fiber, it's very healing to the gut. Thanks for asking me that.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Is it the inside of the lemon peel or
The outside.
The rind.
Yeah, so wash it.
Yeah.
Wash it really well. And then just zest it on your vegetables or in a smoothie or on your chicken. Yeah, lemons are really. Now, if you already have an inflamed gut, which many of us do, you need to think about this a little bit differently. You don't want to, first thing out of the gate, add more fiber. You want to be very gentle. You don't want to have raw foods, raw salads. You want cooked, mashed, slow steamed, slow cooked, boiled, to pre-digest it. You want to put things in a blender to pre-digest them. So the mechanical energy that the energy that it takes for mechanical breakdown of food is significant. It's a significant expenditure of energy for the digestive system. If your digestive system is weak and you're trying to heal, you want to do that for your body as much as you can, because then you've got extra energy in the digestive system that you can use to further break down the food. You don't want to spend it all in the mechanical process if you don't have to. So love that Vitamix. Don't eat stems and peels from fruits or vegetables because they're too fibrous. So visualize those are like sand on an open sore. So you want things that are smooth and soft and calming for an inflamed intestine, at least at first. You want to give the intestine a chance to calm down. If it's being scratched all the time by hard things, it just irritates it further. Onion, shallots, leeks, scallions, garlic can be very irritating because of the sulfurophanes. They can also be very healing. They're highly anti-carcinogenic. Like if your guts are irritated, you don't want those to be your first step. You want to cook those cruciferous vegetables that are so good for us. You want to cook them. And you do not want to eat insoluble fiber on an empty stomach.
So in the first you were talking about, you could eat broccoli without cooking. That would be good, because you get more fiber that way.
If you don't have an inflamed gut.
But then if you play, so it's a switch.
So it's switched, right? So visualize in your mind where you are, what's bothering you, and if you feel like you have an inflamed gut, think gentle, soft, cooked, calm.
If you had like a flu virus, a stomach virus, then you would, and you were healed, that would be healed.
Correct. Drink lots of extra water. So one of the things we know about needing extra water is if you're already constipated, your stool is hard, and it's got a lot of toxins in it. So if your large intestine is inflamed, it will suck the water out of the stool instead of keeping the water in the stool. So you want to drink a lot of water. There's no time never to drink a lot of water. We already talked about apple cider vinegar. Probiotics. Anybody know what probiotics are? Yeah. So probiotics can come in two forms. They can come in fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, or umeboshi plums, or you can get a supplement. Now, a word of caution about probiotics. If you have unhealthy gut flora, if your balance is not 80-20 but 50-50 or less, adding more bacteria, even though they're the good kinds, adding more live bacteria to your gut will cause you discomfort. So you want to start off very slow. You would never take a whole capsule. You might take a quarter of a capsule and build up over time.
How do you determine what your percentage is?
Well, of course, we don't know, but if you're having gas, bloating, discomfort, pain,
So it's
food in your stool, any of those things, then you know that you don't have enough good bacteria. Because if you did, it would take care of the problem.
Supplement,
Udo. Okay, so I think Udo's is a really good brand. You can get that at Mom's or Whole Foods or maybe even at Safeway, I don't know. But there's an adult, it's called an adult probiotic. And it's a pretty good quality probiotic. And not all probiotics are the same. So I think this one, sorry?
refrigerated?
Refrigerated. Refrigerated, yes. Always try and buy probiotics.
when I get to my oncologist.
Right. So what kind you get? Do you know? Is it called?
It says something flora.
Yeah. So probiotics are a mixed bag. Some work better than others. It depends on, so don't forget, we have 500,000 strains that we know of bacteria in our gut. 500,000 strains. Those probiotics may have 3 5, 10, 20. It's hard to know which ones we're missing. And we don't know if too much of the good bacteria helps or hurts us. So you don't want to take it just to take it. Now, lactobacillus happens to be a very good strain. We know we need that in the small intestine. So something with lactobacillus, there's 5, I should have written them down, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are about 5 strains that are helpful almost all the time. But it's not always helpful to take a probiotic that has 20 million live bacteria in it. That's a lot of live bacteria that you're introducing to a gut that may be already in distress. Well, it can cause diarrhea, it can cause constipation, but it may be too much. So more is not better. And you always want to go slow. You know, the best way to learn about your body is to watch what happens, to pay attention to what happens, to listen to your body. So, and take a look at your lifestyle. So it's not that it's not about food, it's just that it's about much more than food. So food is a way that we nourish ourselves. If you're not nourished, if you're malnourished, if you're not absorbing, what else are you not absorbing in your life? How else can you think about this? So there was a man named Dr. Worsley who brought over, he was a physician, and he brought over the original Chinese text from China and introduced 5-element acupuncture in this country. And one of the things he says is that body, spirit, it's all one. It's all one. So every cell of our body is infused with spirit. And every cell of our spirit are the cells of our body. So thinking beyond, you can have the healthiest diet in the world, but if your life is topsy-turvy, if the seesaw is too much one way or the other, if your relationship isn't good, you hate your job, you've got issues with your kids, you've got financial issues, you've just lost your job, your father has Alzheimer's, whatever it is, look at that and see how it's affecting you, because it does affect us. We're spiritual beings. And the gut responds. So the liver, which is, as I mentioned, the main detox organ, is associated with emotions of anger. The gallbladder is associated with emotions of resentment and jealousy. The kidneys are associated with emotions of fear and anxiety. The bladder is associated with emotions of sadness. Sadness. So think about this as you explore your own digestive health. Keep a journal. Notice how what you eat affects how you feel, both physically and emotionally and spiritually. I teach all of my clients meditation so that they can clear the way to be better in touch. I teach my clients yoga so that they will learn to be present in their bodies. What I learned from my own experience was that when I was ill, I didn't like my body very much. I felt like it betrayed me, and so I lived from here up. I was all about work, and I lived from here up. And I divorced myself from what was happening. And when that happens, when you lose touch, you can't hear. You can't hear what your body's trying to tell you, and the body has so much wisdom. So yoga helps us be present in our bodies because we're breathing. We have to pay attention. It's not like being on a treadmill at the gym watching TV, where you don't have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to how you feel in every posture. And so I don't teach yoga for exercise. I teach it for presence, for learning self-awareness. And that is a really important tool for being able to figure out how to heal your gut.
Oh, I can do that.
I got Lyme disease when I was 40 and I'm almost 60.
And how long did you figure it out?
About 8 years before I figured out what was wrong.
You were lucky because you figured it out in 8. For some people, that's eight's a long time, but still, some people still figure. Yeah.
So I'll share another one of my life's lessons with you, which is that I believe, my personal belief, is that illness starts at the level of the soul and moves out into the physical body. So preceding illness, there are emotional or spiritual fractures or upsets or whatever you call them that change the terrain on the inside. We are all human. Shit happens, right? I mean, I guess literally, but it happens. Life happens, and we lose people that we love. Bad things happen, and the way we deal with those changes our vulnerability to other things. And I think that's true of Lyme disease, and I think it's true of a lot of illnesses, maybe all. That's just my own personal philosophy, but anyway, that's the way I approach my clients when I'm working with them. Is that what else is there? What else is there? What's under that? What's under that? What's under that? There's always more. So healing is not just about making these changes. It's about doing the hard emotional work. It's part and parcel of it. You can't get well without doing it. You get well for a little while, but you can't sustain it. So maybe a lot of coaches wouldn't tell you that or don't believe that, but that's what I. So I'm going to just stop here and ask for questions or concerns or issues or things that is brought up for you.
So you were talking about probiotics. In some of the foods that we buy, they're pasteurized. Does that mean it kills all the probiotics?
Pretty much.
Like kefir is pasteurized.
Pretty much. So once probiotics are subjected to high heat, like in pasteurization, they're pretty much dead. Now, there's some I have read, and I don't know if this is true, but I have read that some bacteria survive and that even when they're dead, they're still helpful. But I can't verify that, and I know that high heat kills probiotics, just like high heat kills enzymes.
So what would you recommend that we eat on with probiotics?
Well, things like kimchi or fermented sauerkraut that doesn't use vinegar, so it's just you can make your own. Sorry, Bubby's sauerkraut. There we go, Bubby's sauerkraut. Umeboshi plums. Let me tell you about umeboshi plums. Anybody ever heard of them? They're little Japanese plums. They're very sour. And I first found out about them from a client who didn't produce much saliva in her mouth. She had very dry mouth and associated with thyroid disease. And one of the things that umeboshi plums do is they're so sour, they're a catalyst for the salivary glands. So you start to produce more saliva. And when you produce saliva, you're producing a little bit of bile salts and amylase and anhydrase and bicarbonate of soda.
How do you
So,
spell that?
umeboshi. And they're tiny little purple things. They come in a little package, maybe that big. And they're the first time you can get them at Mom's. I don't know if you can get them at Whole Foods. The first time you have one, you're like, oh, God, that's so sour. You can't eat it. But you get used to it. And so Paul and I tried them, and we quite like them now. But it really generates a lot of saliva in the mouth. This is really good if you have elderly parents, or you know people that are elderly, your neighbors, friends, whatever. Because the older we get, the less saliva we produce. And umeboshi plums can be very helpful for increasing salivation. If you increase salivation, you increase your desire to eat. So many older people, really old, like in their 80s and 90s, they don't have much of an appetite. And part of it is because they have dry mouths and they're not producing enough saliva. So they're not stimulating their appetite.
And then also, impacts your digestion.
It's
Because
absolutely
if you
does.
don't have enough saliva going down the esophagus.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do they sell the plums year round?
Yes, they're packaged, they're fermented plums, so they're like, each one is this big, they have a pin on the
So are they
inside.
in the refrigerated section?
No, it's just, it's where the Asian food is.
Oh, I work on it.
Yeah, me too.
Next time you're at Mom's, say you need a Mom's down by Rockford, because every time I say that, they actually listen. Last time I said, you know, I've been saying it for 5 years.
Good.
Plant the
Good, I
seed.
love plums, yeah. Please.
Would you say carbohydrates generally are more negative than positive, or vice versa?
Really good question, but thanks so much for asking it. No, I would not. So carbohydrates got a bad rap because they were perceived as just adding calories, no nutrients, or because they were broken down into simple sugars, and if you didn't need the sugars, they would go to the liver to be turned into triglycerides or lipids. But we need carbohydrates because they work in tandem with, first of all, they get broken down into simple sugars. And simple sugars, glucose, is the fuel for our cells. So it's the quickest source of energy, the most accessible source of energy for our body. Secondly, when you think about complex carbohydrates, beans, some grains, they have a lot of vitamins in them, a lot of nutrients in them that you don't get elsewhere. So like the B vitamins are prolific in grains, and you can't always find them. So the other thing is that grains, particularly things like brown rice, quinoa, they can help, if you have sleep issues, they help settle the body. So having brown rice at night with your dinner could be very helpful to sleep. I do think that, for me, I try not to mix grains with animal protein because my digestion is still healing. So I try not to do that. Every once in a while I do when I don't have any issues with it, but generally I try not to. If you are pre-diabetic or diabetic, you want to be mindful about how many complex carbohydrates you have because things like butternut squash, the winter squashes, they have a lot of sweet potatoes, they have a lot of sugar. So they are broken down much more slowly because they come in this package with fiber, and fiber slows down the entry of sugar into the bloodstream. But if you're pre-diabetic, that's probably not the first food on the list. But what we do know is the healthier the microbiome, the healthier the person. You get a healthy, diverse microbiome by eating a large diversity of foods. So if you just eat broccoli, cauliflower, chicken and fish, and a couple of fruits, you will not have the diverse microbiome that someone who has a much broader range of foods has. Now, that's not to say I'd go out and eat a lot of cookies and potato chips.
I'm so excited.
And, one thing I didn't talk about here that I meant to, I just neglected it, is what to eat. The more processed foods we have, the more sugar we have, the more caffeine, alcohol, salt we have, the harder it is on our digestion. So the first place I always start with any client is to clean up the diet, to clean it up. So if you love McDonald's, instead of having it 5 days a week, go to 4 days a week. Go to 3 days a week. Go to 2 days a week. You get my drift. Make a change one at a time. Let me give you just a quick example about McDonald's. So let's say it's at 7 p.m. I'm coming home from work and I'm really hungry. I stop, I get a burger and fries and Coke. In the burger, fries, Coke, there are 50 to 60 grams of fat. It's 7 o'clock. The stomach can only process 10 grams of fat at a time. That means that meal isn't going to leave my stomach. Fat's the last thing to leave. That meal is not going to leave my stomach until 1 a.m. At that point, it will go into the small intestine for another 4 to 6 hours anyway. So all the work that my body has to do in terms of cleaning up from the daily metabolic activities, it can't do because it's digesting its food. So I will wake up, I don't eat McDonald's, but if I did, I would wake up feeling groggy, headachy, achy, just kind of crummy. So not only that, this kind of fat at McDonald's, it's bad fat. These are toxic fats. So they're sitting in your body for the entire night plus some, rotting, and causing illness, causing disease. So having a lot of fat late at night, even a big thick steak late at night, is probably one of the worst things you can do for getting a good night's sleep, because it takes so long for the body to break down fat.
So do you think it's better to eat your proteins in the middle of the day than later in the day?
I think that it's fine to eat proteins at all meals, if you like. I mean, we need, proteins are the building blocks of our body. We need protein. Proteins get broken down into amino acids. Those are the building blocks of our neurotransmitters. We need proteins for mood stabilization. So having protein 3 times a day is fine. It doesn't mean a steak 3 times a day. You can have beans, you can have vegetables, you know. So many things have protein. But I would not recommend having your heaviest load of protein/fat late at night.
When you say fat, you're just treating all fats the same?
No.
No.
So avocado, for example, is monosaturated fat.
Right, so I can eat an avocado before I go to bed, right?
I wouldn't have it right before you go to bed, because it's still, the body still has to process.
So it still has the same struggle with avocado
It
that
still has
does
the same
with
struggle,
burger?
right, it does.
Okay.
But it's monosaturated, not saturated. So saturated fat is the
Right.
hardest to break down, and monosaturated is the least difficult. So olive oil, avocados, they're the least difficult to break down in terms of fatty acids.
So is there an ideal time frame when to stop eating versus when you go to sleep?
You know, if you figure that food sits in the stomach 4 to 6 hours,
4 to 6 hours, so.
you know, you probably don't want to eat. You know, I mean, I've read don't eat 2 hours before bedtime. But when you're looking at the physiology of it, food sits in the stomach 4 to 6 hours. So if you have slow transit, like I do, 6 hours is probably more reasonable for me, but I don't do that. I mean, we eat dinner at 7 o'clock. But I eat my biggest meal at lunchtime, knowing that I'm a slow digester and that, you know, so I have a little bit of meat or fish or chicken, whatever, at dinner, but more vegetables. And at lunchtime, I have my biggest portion of animal protein. But that works for me, for my body. For my husband, it's not an issue for him. So we're all really different. And again, understanding how your body works and where the blocks are. A little bit of time, oh no, I don't, I'm sorry, we're talking about the liver, but it's 5 after 9, so I kept you. Yeah.
I was really fascinated with the food combination. If you have a source or recommended,
Sure, body ecology, just Google body ecology diet, Donna
I can read
Gates,
that.
by Donna Gates.
Wasn't that the basis for Fit for Life?
I don't know.
There was
I don't know
a
if
book
it-
out in the 90s called Fit for Life, and it was all food combination eating.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of nutritionists say, oh, that's baloney. But if you notice that when you eat fruits and animal proteins, you have gas, then it's affecting you.
What do you think about eating for your blood type?
I think that there's some merit to it, but I don't prescribe to it. Like, I wouldn't look at someone's blood type and say you should eat these things. I think you use it as one of many guides. So I'm a blood type O positive. O positives do really well with animal protein. I do really well with animal protein.
But I
So-
think even being calm, saying it's only one factor. and he wrote the
Exactly.
book.
It's only one factor. That's exactly right. It's only one factor. And because of, you know, yes, animal proteins work for me, but nuts don't. And nuts are high on that list. Because nuts are really hard to digest, and I have a sensitive digestive system. So it depends on what else is going on. Just because someone says spinach is good for you, if you can't break down oxalic acid, then you're going to feel crummy if you eat spinach.
I think every one of us is like a billion-piece jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And trying
That's
to
a really
figure out
good-
what pieces
Yeah.
work And
Right.
if you use food as a puzzle piece, it can take you a lifetime.
But paying attention, you know, noticing if you've got food, what color it is, what your transit time is, noticing those things, noticing how you feel after you eat meat. Now, if you eat a big piece of meat and it's staying with you for a while, then you know that you've got low stomach acid. You're having a hard time breaking down that fat. There-
meats too, like lamb.
Right, so lamb has a high content of fat, but lamb, interestingly enough, is a very hypoallergenic meat, and they give babies lamb. Lamb is the first meat that babies are introduced to, and in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, not in the NICU, in Children's Hospital, in the children's ward, they'll give you lamb before they give you beef.
I mean, other things, but it's because
Interesting.
it doesn't have the grain diet that cattle does here.
Sorry, so one other thing I just wanted, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to watch what happens when you eat food. Because I see so many people who are sensitive to gluten. They say they're not, they experience no digestive issues, but just because you don't experience digestive issues doesn't mean that your digestive system is not in distress. So if you've got a leaky gut, you could be triggering that autoimmune response, bam, 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 over and over and over again, and you're not having digestive problems, you're having fatigue and joint ache and headaches and insomnia, and blah, blah, blah. Gluten has become so difficult for so many people for a couple of reasons. One is wheat has become hybridized, so it grows in every season, and it's become very elastic protein as a result of that. It is contaminated with Roundup, which is glyphosate. It's used by Monsanto and it's sprayed on almost all grains and not labeled. There's a third reason. Forgotten the third reason, but right, it's very elastic, so the intestine cannot break it down. So more and more people are sensitive to gluten. If you're sensitive to gluten, you are likely to be sensitive to dairy because the casein molecule and the gliadin molecule are very similar. You're also likely to be sensitive to corn and soy. Now, not eating corn and soy is a good thing because these are primarily in the United States genetically modified and, more importantly, they're sprayed with Roundup. What glyphosate does is it causes the insect's intestines to burst from the inside out. And in all of the lab studies, it's highly, highly antagonistic to human cells.
All corn crop, all.
About 95%.
Roundup?
About 95, unless it says non-GMO. You can go to Mom's and buy non-genetically modified corn chips, but it has to say it on the bag.
We've been eating it for over 10 years.
What about organic?
Yeah, what about
It has to say non-GMO.
And can you tell us about your class, where it's going to be held, when?
Yes, so I'm going to hold a class at my home from 11 to 12:30 on Saturdays. There'll be 5 classes over the course of 8 weeks, because I'm going to be away for some on Saturday. And it will be $250 a person, an hour and a half each time. And what we're going to do is we will, as a group, well, first as individuals, identify where we need to start, but as a group, come up with protocols to follow over each week or 2-week period. We will journal. We'll use some different meditative techniques, and we'll go through a healing process of the gut.
Are you in Alexandria?
I'm in Alexandria. I'm right near the I'm not too far from Quaker Lane and Janney's Lane, Quaker Lane and Seminary, like 5 minutes from there, 2 minutes from there. So if you're interested, either take one of my brochures that's sitting out there, or if you signed up, actually, did people sign up for that?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll get in touch, probably start in 2 weeks. And, I would like to keep it to 10 people. I don't have to be, yeah, sorry.
I guess I mean, I have aches and pains and some things that I wonder if they're normal as you get older. But also, how much of this, of gas or pain, I mean, how severe does it have to be? I thought it was sort of normal in your body.
So gas is a normal byproduct of fermentation, which happens in our digestive system. When things become uncomfortable, when things become disabling, when we're embarrassed to go to an event because we're afraid we're going to have too much gas, or we are afraid we're going to have diarrhea, so we're worried about the bathroom, or our skin's breaking out, or we ache. There are lots of people that don't ache. So if you think your health could be better, start with the gut. Start exploring the gut. That would be my 2 cents.
And sometimes if you just, I think, eliminate, a really easy way to start is just try not eating any grain or dairy for 2 weeks. And if you have a sensitivity, you generally will know at the end of the 2 weeks, if you feel better, there's your answer. And it's free.
So let me mention something about that diet. So when we're eating foods that are causing this inflammatory response in our body, even if it's a small one, if it's chronic, what happens is when we stop, at about day 3, the body says, okay, I trust now, I'm not going to have any of this. I'm going to let go of these toxins that I've been holding on to. And you will start to feel unwell. You won't feel sick enough that you have to get in bed, but you will feel just a little achy, headachy, just a little off. And you will feel that way for a couple of days. And by about day 6, you will start to feel really good, and you'll feel better and better and better. After 2 weeks, you will definitely notice the difference. If you go back to then trying dairy or grain, you may have a pretty dramatic reaction. That will confirm that you are sensitive to it, but you may decide that you don't want to do that because you feel good. Why do you want to make yourself feel bad?
And sometimes you
So-
can have bad reactions.
Yes.
Flu-like, because your body's not getting the same crappy food you've been giving it, so it's healing itself. and you can't
What it's
feel
doing
good.
is so we hold toxins in the fat, in our fat, when we and when we're in fight or flight, and as our sympathetic nervous system has kicked in. So we have chronic stress. Let's say we're gluten sensitive, but we don't realize it, and we're eating bread, and we're having monosodium glutamate, and we're having soy sauce, and blah blah blah. So our body is in this constant state of cortisol production, this constant sympathetic state of fight or flight. When your body finally, and one of the things it does is it stores fat, because you need the reserve in case a bear comes. So when it stores fat, it's storing toxins. When you start to not give your body that, and your body starts to relax into a parasympathetic rest and relaxation phase, the body starts to let go of fat. And when it lets go of fat, lo and behold, it lets go of toxins that flood into the bloodstream. Now, the body's not stupid, it doesn't overwhelm you, but you will notice that you don't feel great. But it's kind of cool because you're like, wow, my body's really healing, like,
Yeah.
I got it, it's happening. So, elimination diets are, let me back up and say that if you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. Any change that you make, you must, I would urge you to have a plan. What are you going to eat? Have it in the house. You cannot walk into your house at 7 p.m. being starving, and the only thing that you see or the only thing you feel like is garlic bread, pasta, and tomato sauce.
Sugar. And if you
Or
can
a
start
donut.
it over a weekend, when
You
you
have
get
to,
home.
yeah, you have to plan for this. You need to think about what you're going to eat for the week. You need to have substitutes. So it's less about total elimination and more about substituting. Can you substitute a different kind of pasta? Paul and I eat bean pasta that you can get at Mom's. It's really good. It has no grains in it. But if you're sensitive to beans, you wouldn't start there. So you'd start with rice pasta. So it's really important that you plan what you're going to do, what you're going to take on. And you plan simply. So go for the low-hanging food. Go for the easiest thing. If you drink 5 cups of coffee a day, that is hard as nails on your digestive system. Go to 4 cups. Go to 2 cups. Half decaf, half regular. If you drink sodas, start mixing club soda and juice together and get off all those chemicals that are in the sodas. Diet sodas are worse than regular sodas.
Just a quick question. Does exercise or activity help or is that great?
Exercise always helps. Exercise oxygenates the blood, we get a better flow of nutrients, our lymph system, which clears toxins, works better, everything works better when we sleep better. What you don't want to do is over-exercise so that you are exhausting your body. So we should probably finish, it's 20 after 9. But I want to thank you very much.